Okay, so it looks like I'm on. I am actually down the shore right now. I'm staying at a friend's house, but I saw this tweet from a gentleman named Colby, Elbridge Colby, and he's not a bad guy. I want to start by saying not a bad guy here. But there are some elements to this that aren't entirely truthful. This comes from his chat. Now, what Elbridge Colby said was the United States does not enjoy escalation dominance over Russia. In fact, Russia has many, if not more, nuclear weapons, and they are more modern, an unfortunate but undeniable fact. And when I say this isn't entirely true, it's, again, Elbridge Colby is not a bad guy. He's a little more China-focused than the average analyst or like think tank guy. That's kind of what he is. The guy probably uses my software. But the kind of the issue here is that on Twitter, you really only have 240 characters. And so you can only get so much information across. And what I find very dangerous about statements like this: Russia does not enjoy escalation dominance over Russia. Russia has many, if not more, nuclear weapons, and they are more modern. There's a lot of elements in that are designed to scare people, but aren't really factual or don't actually matter. And here's kind of how I would go with this. First off, this is the drumbeat of what if Russia nukes us? And my answer to that is usually, well, we have nuclear weapons too. And you knew the whiskey was going to make an appearance. We have nuclear weapons too. And one of the things you have to understand about President Putin is that dictators, what they tend to want is to stay in power. So a dictator like President Putin knows that if he uses a nuclear weapon, he's probably not going to be in power for very long, either through a revolution in his own country or removed by force from NATO. Now, here's the other kind of issue that I have here, and I want to go back to the actual statement here. Russia, United States does not enjoy escalation dominance over Russia. So I'm going to start with that quote. Russia doesn't need any excuse to escalate. They can kind of do Russia's going to do what Russia wants to do. And I think one of our issues is that in not standing up to Russia and letting Russia control the operational tempo of their operations inside Ukraine, in doing that, we've kind of emboldened Russia. One of the things that I like to talk about is Vietnam as an example, where we weren't allowed to attack certain targets in Vietnam because, well, what if we bomb them and we kill some Russian advisors? Well, so what if we kill some Russian advisors? Like, we can't just, if we hand that to Russia and say, well, we're not going to bomb these airfields in North Vietnam because we might kill some Russians, what's Russia going to do? And to kind of paraphrase General Grant, I want General Lee, I don't want us to stop worrying about what General Lee's going to do and have General Lee start worrying about what we're going to do. And Russia needs to worry about what we're going to do. We can't be running around worrying about what's Russia going to do if we blank, because Russia doesn't need an excuse. They're just going to do what they want to do anyway. So that's kind of number one. Let's go back to the actual tweet here. So, in fact, Russia has many, if not more, nuclear weapons, and they are more modern. So let's just concentrate on Russia has many, if not more, nuclear weapons. So that's kind of iffy on that. Now, since we haven't been inspecting each other's stockpiles for a number of years, I think it was the START II treaty expired, and we used to actually send people over to Russia, and Russia would send people here. I think we were allowed to inspect like 5 sites a year. You can Google it. I'm kind of doing this from memory. But if you actually take a look at the estimated global nuclear inventory warheads, right now the United States has about 5,200 nuclear warheads. Russia has a couple more. And I believe the U.S. really only has about 3,500 nuclear warheads. A lot of them were taken out of service. Now, I also want to talk about the word newer. So that's another word this gentleman uses. He uses the word, they are more modern. So, kind of prepare yourself for a shock here. Plutonium has a half-life of like 24,000 years. It's actually like 24,100 some years. So once you make that pit of plutonium, I think I call it the physics package. Once you make that pit of plutonium, you're good for the next 24,000 years. Now, actually, it wouldn't be 24,000. It would be less than that, but you kind of get the idea here. Like when it comes to actually manufacturing plutonium, we've manufactured enough plutonium that our needs are being met. Now, nuclear weapons need other kind of maintenance. Sometimes the bricks of explosives that are around the pit, sometimes those crack. It's due to neutron decay, and the neutron will hit the actual explosives. They can actually crack them open. They have to periodically replace them. And tritium is used as a booster. It's tritium and lithium-6 deuteride, I believe. So those elements are used to actually boost the explosion. So you actually get a fission, fusion bomb. So the fact that the weapons are newer, if you're talking about plutonium, it doesn't matter if Russia has newer plutonium. Plutonium is still going to the plutonium we made in the 1950s is still going to give you approximately the same yield. So you're good. Now, when it comes to delivery systems, all right, Russia might have an advantage on delivery systems because they have been working on new delivery systems. And when it comes to our delivery systems, we have Minuteman III, we have the Trident missile, we have gravity bombs, the M61 gravity bomb, I can't remember the darn name of the ACOs, the AGM, not AGM-88, that's the harm. I can't remember the darn name of the air-launched cruise missile that are put on the B-52s, but again, you can Google that easy enough. But those weapon systems, they're not entirely new. Russia does have some new weapons. We're working on some new ones as well. A new version of the gravity bomb that's a bunker buster, and we're working on the new Sentinel ICBM. Now, the question is, this is something I always say, if Russia, soldiers in Russia are going into battle wearing airsoft body armor and cardboard inside their reactive armor on their tanks. So, if you are a Russian general in the strategic rocket forces and you are given X amount of money to maintain your warheads, then are you really going to refresh those warheads? Are you really going to make sure those warheads have tritium in them to boost the explosive power of the weapon? Or might you divert some of that money? Because odds are those nuclear weapons won't be used, but you still want a dacha, right? And a nuclear weapon is a lot less visible than something like a tank. So if people were putting fake armor on tanks, you can just imagine what they might have been doing with nuclear weapons. They're probably robbing people blind. Now, the nuclear weapons that are on Russia's Bory-class submarines, I have no doubt in my mind that every single one of those weapons works. But they normally only have one Bory-class submarine, I think one or two, out in their bastions at any given time. So that's so they might have, I can't remember how many tubes are on the Bory-class submarine, but you can look that up easy enough. But the point is that just because Russia has made some new delivery systems doesn't really mean that they necessarily gain a strategic advantage. And also, when it comes to actually looking at estimated global nuclear warhead inventories, if the U.S. has, say, 3,500 nuclear weapons that are ready to go, and Russia has approximately the same amount ready to go, or even a couple more ready to go, if there is a full exchange, it really doesn't matter if Russia has 100 extra warheads. Like, at that point, we got more problems than the fact that Russia has a couple extra warheads. So, saying they have a couple extra, more, newer, it doesn't really mean much. Saying they're more modern, and it is an unfortunate but undeniable fact. Now, the problem I have with this, it's the same problem I had with Annie Jacobson, the woman who has been going on every single podcast scaring the crap out of people about nuclear war with Russia. And the problem I have is that people like Elbridge Colby and Annie Jacobson, they run their mouths of, oh my God, what if Russia nukes us? And you know what it kind of reminds me of is it kind of reminds me of what this Baltimore mayor said. This couple of years back, it was actually a horrible situation. There was a guy who was kind of taken for a rough ride by the Baltimore police, and the guy died. An African American man. The guy died. Police shouldn't have done that. Now this mayor, I'm going to turn off the chat for a second. This mayor said that we gave those who wish to destroy space to do that. So we gave those who wish to destroy space to do that. And how does that connect, Ryan? Well, I'll tell you how that connects. Because do we want to give Russia space to do whatever they want because they have nukes? Because you know what? We have nukes too. So by not standing up to Russia, by not saying, no, you don't get to behave like this in the modern world, that's kind of what we're doing. We're giving Russia space to destroy. That's really no different than what that Baltimore mayor did. We're going to give those who wish space to destroy. So one of the things that I like to talk about, and I've sat in front of, I'll throw this back up. I've sat in front of speeches. I've given speeches before about this, where I talk about how America loses the next war. And one of the things I throw up there is this diagram. And you know what I am going to do is I'm going to throw this onto my whiteboard. Everybody still hear me? So I'm going to throw this onto my whiteboard. And I do this when I want to kind of illustrate the example that we are at war with Russia now. And I've gone on Sebastian Gorka's radio show, and I've gone on Destiny's radio show, and I've explained this diagram, and I've explained what's going on. But you know, if you take a look at something like this, well, let me throw that back up there. So let me get my screen brush out. So land warfare. All right, we have been fighting on land since Thag looked at Ragnar, and Thag decided to stab Ragnar with a pointy stick because he didn't like the way Ragnar was always ordering people around. Right. So we've been fighting the land warfare domain for 100,000 years. And we've been fighting in the sea domain since the Peloponnesian War. We've been fighting on the sea since the Peloponnesian War. We've been fighting in the air domain since World War I, right? Ever since we got the planes in the air, the biplanes, we've been fighting in the air since World War I. And you could argue that we've been fighting in space. You could say space is a component of air. We've been fighting in space since 1991, back during the first Gulf War, when we crossed the uncrossable desert. Iraq barely even had any troops in their western desert because they thought no one will ever be able to cross the western desert because we know how to navigate that. The Americans won't know. Well, Iraqis didn't know we had GPS down at the platoon level. Now, at the time, it was about as big as a shoebox and vehicle mounted, but we had GPS. And there's this legend of an Iraqi brigade commander who surrendered, and an American brigade commander was showing him the GPS, and the guy was like, oh, what do you have this per brigade, per battalion? And the American commander was like, no, man, per platoon. Now, maybe that's apocryphal, right? But anyway, so we've been fighting in the air for, since roughly World War I. And cyber war, right? No one can argue that cyber isn't a domain of warfare. We've been fighting in the cyber domain since 2007, and that was back when Estonia took a statue. There was this Soviet statue. I think it was called the Soldier of Tallinn. It was in the center of this town, Tallinn, Estonia. And Estonia decided to move it to a Russian war cemetery, and Russia launched a massive cyber attack against Estonia. It was basically the first cyber war. And incidentally, that's why Estonia has such good cyber forces today. Estonia is a force to be reckoned with, and we are lucky to have Estonia as a NATO partner. But one of the things, again, that I roll up, and I always say this whenever I get a chance to do any kind of speaking engagements, and I said this at the Naval Academy when I spoke there, which was information war. We are in an information war. Information is a component of warfare that goes through the land, the sea, and the air. An information war is a war of minds. Instead of Russia trying to destroy our will through bombs and missiles, they do it by typing, by going on Facebook, by going on Twitter, by trying to influence us. It is an influence operation. We have been at war with Russia since February of 2022. Russia has been trying to influence us not to support Ukraine since 2022, February 2022. If information war, again, look up here. If information war is a domain of warfare, we are at war. And we have been at war for the past 2 years. Whether you like it or not, we are at war right now. We are fighting World War III right now. It's just the information component of that war. Now, all that being said, I covered tritium. I covered how I don't think Russia actually takes care of their warheads. So the next thing I want to talk about is, let me throw this up here. The next thing I want to talk about is this fear, this escalation dominance. The United States doesn't enjoy escalation dominance. They have more nuclear weapons. And that's the one thing that people always say, what if Russia goes nuclear? And what I like to say when people say that is, what does that actually mean? And then they usually get real quiet. I say, give me a plausible scenario. Does that mean Russia launches a nuclear weapon toward New York City? No, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. So there's really only 5 use cases for a nuclear weapon. 5. At least the battlefield tactical nuclear weapon, which is what Russia would most likely use if they ever had to use one. So the first use case for a nuclear weapon is to create a gap in enemy defenses that the enemy would push through that gap to break through. So you would detonate a nuclear weapon, and someone just asked me, what booth am I in? I'm at a friend's house in Virginia Beach, and this is my little portable studio right here. So, number one, nuclear weapon could be used to create a gap. You use a nuclear weapon and you detonate that nuclear weapon in an airburst. That way there's a lot less radioactive fallout. And you detonate that over the enemy's trench lines, and then you run all of your troops through that blast area, and then you can punch through their lines and wreak havoc in their rear. I don't really see that as an option because Russia hasn't seemed to be able to exploit any kind of breakthrough. So if you're going to use a nuclear weapon like that, you can probably expect a global response to the use of that nuclear weapon. So the bang has to be worth the buck. And one of the issues is that Russia just they can't stage enough troops to actually commit a breakthrough, and once they do break through, they can't really logistically take care of those troops. So using a nuclear weapon to break through enemy lines really isn't a scenario that's likely. Number two, the second use of a nuclear weapon would be to stop the advance of an enemy force. And I could certainly see that. I actually think that is the most likely outcome if somehow Russian forces start to collapse and Ukraine is actually able to break through. If Ukraine is actually able to break through and they run pell-mell toward the Sea of Azov to cut off Crimea, that I could see Russia using a tactical nuclear weapon, probably dropped by a Su-34 on the Vanguard, to destroy that Vanguard and stop their halt like that, right? I could see that as a possibility. I think it's a remote possibility, but I think it is a possibility. Third use of a nuclear weapon today would be to destroy an underground command and control bunker, but I'm talking something like NORAD or the bunker that Taiwan has underneath that mountain. I can't remember the name of it right now. That would be a third use of a nuclear weapon. And Ukraine really doesn't have any of those kinds of targets. They've been able to distribute their command and control fairly well, so there's no deep underground bunker that Ukraine runs their war from. The fourth use of a nuclear weapon would be a good choice in destroying an aircraft carrier battle group. That would actually be an excellent choice, because if you can overwhelm the defenses with drones and conventional munitions and conventional missiles, they can get a nuclear weapon in there, and that would be a carrier killer. Especially if you put a nuclear weapon on a hypersonic missile. That's a great carrier killer right there. But Ukraine doesn't have a navy. Now, could a nuclear weapon be used against a NATO carrier battle group? if NATO got involved in the war, it's certainly possible. Certainly possible. But again, I don't really see NATO getting involved to the point where a battle group is being sent just because of the location. Turkey's closed the Black Sea essentially to any kind of marine traffic, and maybe you might have some action up north. But you know, we've just spent, God, how many days? Probably about 6 months shooting down Houthi missiles in the Red Sea. We got a lot of data from those engagements, and we're only going to get better at shooting missiles down. So trying to fire any kind of nuclear weapon, you know, you can fire a nuclear weapon at a carrier battle group, but that doesn't mean it's going to get through. All right? And the fifth use of a nuclear weapon would be a good choice to destroy an amphibious landing unit, or to deny a river crossing. If you do something like that, you want that dirty. That's where you want to actually drop that nuclear weapon to the ground and irradiate as much soil as possible. Hang Shang Military Command Center. Thank you there, Tisano. I appreciate that. So, you know, that being said, a nuclear weapon would be a good choice to destroy a beachhead of an amphibious group, or to destroy the fording site for a river crossing. And again, Ukraine doesn't have a navy, right? They're not going to be doing any landings on Crimea anytime soon. A fording site, maybe. When last 2 years ago, when Ukraine performed that offensive that took back Kherson, I thought that if Russia was going to use a nuclear weapon, it would be on the Oskil River, because that's where a fording site was, and it just never happened. So the kind of the final thing here, and kind of the final nail in the coffin of Elbridge Colby's tweet here, is a lot of this kind of goes back to China. And you go, Ryan, what does China have to do with any of this stuff? And, you know, when it comes to, remember what I said about amphibious landings, and how performing an amphibious landing would be an excellent target for a nuclear weapon. I would not be surprised if China said to Russia, don't you dare use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. Because if Russia ever did use a nuclear weapon, now you've just opened up Pandora's box, right? Now you've just lowered the bar for use of tactical nuclear weapons. And when, because it's not an if, it's a when China tries to invade Taiwan, they will have to use an amphibious landing. There'll be some airborne drops, but they're going to have to land troops amphibiously, which means a beachhead, which means ships that are bunched up trying to get cargo ashore, which is an excellent target for a nuclear weapon. So if there is one nation on earth that does not want to see Russia use a nuclear weapon, it's China. So China is probably holding the leash of Vladimir Putin when it comes to something like that. So that's why I don't consider any nuclear talk about Russia to be all that credible. It's just one of those things that is great at scaring people. And again, Elbridge Colby, look, his main thing is China. And he's going to say what he needs to say in order to kind of get focused people on China's the real threat, China's the real threat, China's the real threat, because that's kind of his thing. That's his shtick. Everybody needs a way to make a living, and Elbridge Colby's way of making a living is saying China's the real threat. And he's not wrong. China's a threat. But right now, Russia's a threat too. Because once Ukraine falls, if we let Ukraine fall, the next are the Baltics, and the next is Poland. And then we're going to be in it. Well, technically, we're already in it, because like I said, we've been fighting World War III in the information domain since February of 2022. So, we're already at war, and we haven't been nuked yet. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to get this out real quick to kind of correct Elbridge Colby on this. Again, he's not a bad guy. He just didn't really elaborate on the nuances of the situation. And thank you guys so much for watching. He's not a bad guy.